Today I would like to focus with you on a couple of spiritual qualities, the qualities of love and acceptance, which certainly go together. And I'm not talking about the surface kind of love and acceptance. This is a kind that goes very deep, is all-inclusive, and involves diversity. It's the idea that we can draw a circle and it leaves absolutely no one out. And within our own consciousness and framework, we need to know if we have anything going on anywhere with anything in creation that would put that outside the circle. You recall that Jesus talked many times in many ways about these various things. He said if you are asked to go 1 mile, go with them 2. He said to love your enemies. He said to love your neighbor. And of course, your neighbor means that it's anyone. Could be another race, could be another culture, could be another lifestyle, could be another of a different political persuasion. Doesn't matter. And Jesus goes even beyond that and sets the bar higher by saying, if you just love those who love you, there is no reward in that. Really, that's easy. Anyone can do that. And so part of your spiritual growth is to love where it's not easy. And to move beyond those tendencies of holding back in any way. And so it's to love those who you may not feel are loving you. It may be to love those who are different than you in any way. He then talks about how it is that the person who looks at things and has a particular perspective on things, that essentially it can feed you, it can feed your soul. And he tells us that the light of the body is the eye, and that if the eye be single, that the whole body will be full of light, so that there is some advantage of having that single eye. And the single eye really means focused in a particular way, and that means focused on goodness, focused on seeing God everywhere in all creation, seeing with the eye of truth, if you will, that at the core of every individual is the Spirit of the living God, and it's seeing that and knowing that. And when you do that, you actually feel different, that you have an influx of light. You become a being of light, as Jesus said, to remove that bushel or remove that basket or whatever is covering it, that you actually begin to feel a radiance welling up inside of you. And he talked about if you go the other direction, the opposite direction with that focus, that essentially what you're going to experience is a degree of darkness, okay? That the whole body shall be full of darkness. Doesn't mean that darkness is your truth. It means you've covered over the light. But essentially, when we go through dark days or dark times, it's usually when we feel separate from God or separate from others, separate from life. We're heavy into our mind, our ego, our judgmental nature, our human judging of ourselves and others, that whole dynamic. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about the importance of diversity. We teach diversity, you live diversity, but diversity runs deep. And it is a learning experience, really, to continue to awaken to deeper and deeper levels of an all-inclusive kind of love and acceptance. It's a very important thing to learn, is diversity, and to embrace. With the world becoming more and more global, it should be understood that it will become more and more diverse, and that there is nothing that is going to stop this world from becoming a melting pot of variety of cultures and different diversities. And so it's important that we not look at that in any way as something negative, but that diversity really helps us in a positive way reform society, reform the world. It's the only thing that will bring a sense of peace to the world, will be an acceptance of all people where they may be in terms of their philosophy, ideation, and so forth, as long as they're not hurting anyone, of course. The scriptures actually talk about the word diversity and use that word. Actually, if you go to the King James translation, it talks about in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, where it uses that word, and it speaks about there being diversities of gifts, but the same Spirit. That there are differences of administrations, but the same Lord. That there are diversities of operations, but it is the same God which worketh in all. That's really powerful, to know that whatever's going on out there, no matter how it is you may view it, it's still the same Spirit, the same Lord, the same God which worketh all in all. A few verses later from this, just down a little bit, it talks about saying, for by one Spirit we all baptized into one body. By one Spirit are we all baptized into one body. Whether we be Jews or Gentiles, whether we be bond or free, we've been all made to drink into and of one Spirit. Again, very powerful, very powerful. So it's saying, Jew, Gentile, this, that, whatever it is that your mind, your ego wants to set up as being different, apart, separate, not you, us, and them, whatever, that essentially we're all drinking of the same Spirit, from the same essence of the divine. So diversity is something that teaches us simply to accept differences, really, because there will always be differences, okay? It's to be able to look beyond anything that appears to make another different in some way. And whether it be a language, whether it be the culture, whether it be race, whether it be lifestyle, whether it be ideas, opinions, ways one dresses, how we appear, all of that. And I'm convinced that God loves variety. God gave us the opportunity to learn to look past form and to learn to look past differences because there are so many that exist. Every snowflake, every set of fingerprints, every leaf on every tree, every grain of sand is basically different from any other. I love the writings of Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou happens to be an African-American, wonderful author and poet, famous lady, beautiful soul. She credits Unity as really helping her in her spiritual unfoldment and path when she discovered the writings of Unity. She's somewhere around 88, 89, 90 now, and still just absolute beautiful soul. Some of you may have heard her speak at one time or another. But anyway, I love some of the things she says because it's so in touch. And one of the things she says around this is, she says, we all should know that diversity makes for a rich tapestry. And we must understand that all the threads of the tapestry are equal in value. Equal in value, that's very important. No matter what their color, meaning no matter what makes another different. Have you seen in the news, there's been a lot of recurring instances of bullying and things going on. Many times kids in school, high school, college, whatever, and taking people all the way to a cliff where some have even chosen to take their life. Very, very sad. There was even in this past week, an elderly lady who was all over the national, international news perhaps, about a lady who was 68 years old that was being bullied on a bus by some, I think, 3 or 4 7th graders. And they even had some film footage of it. And this lady had done nothing to provoke it, but they were calling her fat. And the only way she was different was she was elderly, they were young. Who knows what goes on in that dynamic. But the kids have since apologized. And because it became so known in the news, people sent money in to help her go on a vacation. You know how much money has come into her? $510,000. That's quite a vacation. But the beauty of that is that you see how many people's heart opens to seeing the sadness of that and wanting to mend that wound for that 68-year-old lady who sat there and took it, you know. Maya Angelou, again, she has this to say. She says, if we lose love and self-respect for each other, this is how we finally die. You know, there's a darkness that Jesus talked about that comes over us, that kind of kills the energy, stymies the light, that if we're not shining that light, we don't feel ourselves. We don't feel attuned to the core of who and what we are and are held to be in the mind of God. And so we die inside as an individual to some extent. It's so important, I think, to teach our children the importance of diversity and how to be more accepting of others. Grade schools, colleges even, should have courses on this, on diversity and accepting one another. When a youth's child is being developed, or their mind is being developed and is pliable, and just to be able to keep reinforcing the importance of that, to be at the forefront of one's consciousness, because I think it leads to the healing of relationships everywhere and healing on the planet everywhere. This idea of feelings of superiority or of prejudice or bias or bigotry, needs to be eliminated so that these youth become true world citizens that create a whole nother energy. There are so many things really that can be used, that a person can use to divide themselves from others. When one hasn't learned to accept diversity, the mind and the ego goes to work and always points out the things to be worried about, afraid of, intimidated by, or wrong, or whatever is the course of judgment that can go on. But creativity actually is a product of diversity. We have people with different ways of doing things. Certainly, we've moved into the place, certainly made progress at least, where women are in the boardrooms along with men. That women see things different than men. It's known. It's a plus. But there are other people who have come from different places that have other ways of seeing and doing things. There's a true story about a guy named Larry Walters. And he was a truck driver, 33 years old. This is some years ago. And one day he was sitting in his lawn chair in his backyard, and he was wishing that he could fly. As long as he could remember, he always wanted to be able to fly. But he didn't have the time, the money, the education, the opportunity to be a pilot. Hang gliding wasn't an option for him. But there he was. He spent a lot of his summer afternoons sitting in the backyard in his ordinary old aluminum lawn chair. And the story picks up, actually, is told by Robert Fulghum in one of his books, author Robert Fulghum. And he writes, the next chapter in this story, as it is a true story, is carried by the newspapers and television. There's old Larry Walters up in the air over Los Angeles, flying at last, really getting up there, still sitting in his aluminum lawn chair, but is hooked onto 45 helium-filled surplus weather balloons. Larry has a parachute on. He has a CB radio. He has a six-pack of beer. He has some peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. True story. And he has a BB gun to pop some of the balloons when it's time to come down. And instead of being just a couple hundred feet above his neighborhood, he has shot up 11,000 feet right through the approach corridor to the Los Angeles International Airport. Now, Walters was a man of few words. He didn't really talk a lot. But when he was asked by the press why he did it, he said, "You can't just sit here." When asked if he was scared, he answered, "Wonderfully so." And when asked if he would do it again, he said, "Nope." And asked if he was glad that he did it, there was a grin that came ear to ear, and he said, "Oh yes, oh yes." So Larry Walters, he got creative, came at it from a different angle. Maybe we wouldn't have ever done that. It was unique. We would say different. Some might say odd. Some might say strange. Some might want to ridicule him. Others would make him a hero. It's all in perspective, isn't it? And there's a metaphor here for much of the human race, really. There are those who are sort of grounded. They are grounded in a perspective, sitting in their chair, somewhat unawake to who they are, or their unique contribution that is there to be made, the gift that they bring, perhaps judging themselves in limiting ways, judging therefore others from that chair and that low elevation. And then there are the Larry Walters of the earth, that are busy tying balloons to their chairs. And they've directed their dreams and their imagination to do their thing, as long as it's hurting no one. And so some people are sitting in their chair at a very low elevation with their perceptions and their judgments of self and others. And then there are others that are the Larry Walters, soaring upward, into higher elevations of spiritual awakening, not stuck in the limiting judgments about themselves, not therefore stuck in the limiting judgments about others, and how it is that they wish to get to 11,000 feet and gain a perspective, a heightened perspective that we're really all one. A person was driving through the country roads and headed to somewhere. It was a place that they drove from time to time. And as they were driving along, there was a farm that they passed, and the farm had an A-frame sign out front. And the sign said, "Atheist Puppies." And so a person, drove on by, and they happened to be driving on the same road, driving past the same farm a week or two later. And now the A-frame sign was out there, and it now read and had been changed to say, "Spiritual Puppies." So this person really thought, this is weird, so they decided to stop. And they went in and asked the person inside, the farmer, and said, "What is this? You had a sign out a week or two ago that said atheist puppies, and now you have a sign out there that says spiritual puppies, and are there two separate batches of puppies that you've had?" And the farmer said, "No, it's the same batch of puppies." And so the person says, "Well, how did they go from being atheists to spiritual puppies?" He said, "Well, now they have their eyes open." Now they have their eyes open. As you know, a puppy, when it's born, it's several days before its eyes open. And so this was the distinction that the farmer was making. So if you have your spiritual eyes open, and if you were driving along and you were perhaps looking for a puppy, and the sign said, Baptist puppies, Catholic puppies, Buddhist puppies, Hindu puppies, Islamic puppies, white puppies, black puppies, gay puppies, Republican puppies, Democrat puppies, hopefully you would still stop and you would embrace and you would love the puppies, because your spiritual eyes are open and you've learned to embrace diversity. Maya Angelou, the dear soul, she states, "As human beings, we are more alike than we are unalike." And how true that is, if we could just remember that. The question becomes then, are we willing to look to the likenesses rather than the differences? God gave us the opportunity to learn not to judge, invited us not to judge. Jesus taught not to judge, because when we do, we separate on out and we divide. Instead, we are to honor diversity and to love all. And Jesus demonstrated that. There wasn't anyone that he embraced, forgave, loved them through to their next highest expression. So have you ever felt like you were outside the circle of acceptance, maybe of a group, maybe in high school, maybe in grade school, or maybe in adulthood, who knows? But there might have been the in crowd and you were excluded somehow. You who felt or made to feel rejected or less than or not enough or feel inferior, whatever. And it can be a painful thing, it is. And it's not easy to get over, really. Maya Angelou says this: "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." People will never forget how you made them feel, good or bad. They remember the feeling that they felt, whether it was accepted or rejected, whether it was included or excluded. Now, I haven't experienced personally in my life near the rejection that others have in their life due to bias, prejudice, sexism, whatever. But I can relate back to a time that I will never forget. And it was a time when I was in high school. I was small for my age, so I had a lot of stuff going on with that, feeling left out on the playground. I loved basketball, so I wouldn't get picked because I didn't look like I was even their age, my grade level. But, you know, some of that. But when I went to high school, I still loved basketball. I tried out. It was a fairly large high school. We had like 60-some kids or more that tried out for the freshman team. There was a story in how I made it onto the 15th man as a freshman. And the coach believed in me. You could feel that. And as a result, I produced. And I made my way up to the 6th man. So I was the first one to go into a game as a reserve. I went into my sophomore year, and the coaches changed. So I had another coach. And this coach did not believe in me. And so it just deteriorated. I was not a troublemaker. His whole message was he didn't believe in me. And basically, the most difficult time that I went through was like the last 4 weeks of the season. When you have practices, you may not get in at the games, but in practice, you at least get to scrimmage with your teammates. And there were 15 guys on the team. A first team of 5, second team of 5, third team of 5. So he eventually had me down on the third team. Well, everyone got to scrimmage those last 4 weeks on those days that we had practice, except me. I was the only one who sat on the sideline and never, ever did he ever put me in. I just about died. I still have never forgotten the pain of that, the humiliation and the resentment that you feel towards that coach. I have since forgiven him. But I've never forgotten what it feels like for a person to be put through that, the insensitivity of that, you see. And perhaps it helped me as I, in my journey, found unity which was so accepting and embracing of all people that it felt like home to me, because I could never come to the place where I would exclude another human being for whatever reason. Whatever they chose to believe, I will love them as the journey that they're on. And so, you know, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., he once said that 11 a.m. on a Sunday is the most segregated hour of the week. Isn't that interesting? Fairly accurate, could be. But I think we've made progress. It is being made. History was made, of course, when America put its first African American in the White House. Whatever your political affiliation and whatever you feel your opinion is of how things are going, that aside, that was a great day in the name of diversity in the US of A. That was wonderful. This past week in the news, there was a man from New Orleans, a 55-year-old African American preacher, who was elected unanimously to be president of the 16 million member Southern Baptist Convention, which was founded in 1845 by Baptists who were defenders of slavery at the time. Now, he is the first African American to be elected to this post in the history of the organization, about 170 years after it was formed. That's great news. Even though it took that long, that's great news. I'm proud to say that a good friend of mine, Reverend Jim Lee, who's minister up in Detroit, he's just completed his year as chair and president of the board of Unity Worldwide Ministries. And his good friend and mine also, Reverend James Trapp, who also happens to be an African American and spoke here in this church. He's served the last 6 years or so as CEO of Unity Worldwide Ministries. You see, we need to learn to just accept. It's so important. Whether we be large or small, you know, whether we have different ideas or different philosophies, different opinions, different views, different sexual orientation, different appearance, whatever. You know, we're all one. We're really all one. And that's what we need to stick to and know. And always remember, never forget. Because that in itself is such a contribution to never energetically, suddenly separate and divide. We are all human as well. We're spiritual, but we're all human too. We all laugh, we all cry, we all eat, we all worry, we all bleed, we all die. You know? And the more we understand each other, we may find out how much we're all alike and the gifts that we each bring and what deep friendships can be born. Each of us is like a flower, you know, that has its own individual makeup, and we all have our inner beauty and fragrance that we bring to the divine garden of life that we've been planted in. And so each soul in some degree is basically reflecting the same light, and they're breathing from the same breeze that blows through this garden of life. And if one looks at nature, they will see the immense diversity of creation, you know, and realize